Jungkook, don't move. Jimin's scream tore through the stadium just as Jungkook's knees suddenly buckled beneath him. And for one terrifying second, the roar of tens of thousands of fans disappeared beneath the sound of his microphone hitting the stage floor. The lights were still blazing overhead, sweeping across a sea of purple light sticks, but something had changed. Jungkook stood frozen in the center of the stage, one hand pressed against his chest, the other reaching instinctively toward the air, as though he were trying to grab hold of something invisible. His face had lost its usual color. The smile he had been wearing only seconds earlier was gone. Jimin saw it before anyone else did. He saw the tiny tremor in Jungkook's fingers. He saw the way Jungkook swallowed hard. He saw his eyes briefly close as if the entire stadium had suddenly begun spinning. Jungkook! Jimin shouted again, rushing toward him. The music continued for another 2 seconds before the sound engineer realized something was wrong, and abruptly lowered the track. The sudden silence was almost more frightening than the music. RM turned around. Jin stopped mid-step. SUGA's expression hardened instantly. J-Hope stared toward the center of the stage, his smile disappearing. Taeyong froze beneath the white spotlight. Then Jungkook swayed. Catch him! Jimin yelled. Taeyong and J-Hope moved at almost the same moment, but Jimin reached him first. Jungkook's body leaned forward, and Jimin caught him around the shoulders before his head could strike the floor. I've got you, Jimin whispered, his voice shaking. I've got you, Jungkook. Jungkook tried to answer, but nothing came out. His breathing was shallow and uneven. Hyung was all Jimin heard. The word was so quiet that Jimin almost missed it. What? Jimin leaned closer. Jungkook's eyes opened halfway. Don't let them stop the show. Jimin stared at him in disbelief. Are you serious? He whispered. Forget the show. RM was already calling for the medical team. Everyone moved back. Give him space. Jin stepped between Jungkook and the front rows, trying to shield him from the thousands of cameras that had instantly risen into the air. J-Hope crouched beside Jimin. Jungkook, look at me. Jungkook tried. His pupils struggled to focus. Breathe slowly, J-Hope said. Just breathe. Behind them, SUGA had stopped looking at the crowd altogether. His eyes were fixed on Jungkook, and there was something unusual in his expression. Not panic exactly, but recognition. He had seen that look before. He had noticed Jungkook becoming quieter during rehearsals. He had noticed the untouched food in the dressing room. He had noticed Jungkook staying behind after everyone else left. But whenever SUGA asked if something was wrong, Jungkook always smiled and said the same thing. I've fine. Now, standing under the unforgiving stage lights, SUGA realized how meaningless those words had been. The medical team finally reached the stage. Jimin refused to move. Let them check him, RM said gently. Jimin. No, Jimin's answer came instantly. I'm stay. Jungkook heard him. Even in his dazed state, his fingers reached weakly toward Jimin's sleeve. Jimin grabbed his hand. I'm here. Jungkook squeezed once. Barely. Then his eyes closed again. Jungkook. Jimin's voice cracked. Jungkook, open your eyes. The medical staff immediately checked his pulse and breathing while RM stood nearby, his jaw tight. The stadium remained almost completely silent. Tens of thousands of people who had come expecting music and celebration were now watching 7 performers gather around one member, who appeared unable to stand. A little girl near the barricade began crying. Somewhere in the upper seats, someone shouted Jungkook's name. Then another voice joined. Then thousands. Jungkook, Jungkook, Jungkook. The chant rolled through the stadium like thunder. Jungkook slowly opened his eyes. They're calling you, Jimin whispered. Jungkook gave the faintest smile. I can hear them. Then listen to me instead, Jimin said, squeezing his hand. You don't have to prove anything tonight. Jungkook looked away. That sentence hit something inside him. Because proving himself had become a habit long before anyone realized it. He had learned to smile when exhausted. He had learned to joke when frightened. He had learned to perform through pain, through sleepless nights, through moments when his body begged him to stop. Somewhere along the way, Jungkook had begun confusing endurance with strength. I can finish, he whispered. Jimin shook his head. No, Jimin. No, his voice became firmer. For once, let us take care of you. Jungkook stared at him. The words seemed to hurt more than the dizziness. Taehyung crouched beside them. You don't have to carry everything alone. Jungkook looked at him, then at J-Hope, Jin, SUGA, and finally RM. 6 faces surrounded him. 6 people who had spent years watching him grow from a nervous young performer into one of the most recognizable artists in the world. Yet in that moment, none of them cared about the audience, the cameras, the choreography, or the schedule. They only cared about the person lying beneath the stage lights. I'm sorry, Jungkook whispered. For what? Jin asked, making everyone worry. Jin's eyes became wet. That's what family does. The medical team recommended that Jungkook leave the stage. The crowd began chanting again, but this time Jimin stood and addressed them. Please, he said into his microphone, his voice trembling. Give him a moment. The audience answered with thousands of voices shouting support. Jungkook heard them from the floor and closed his eyes. A tear slipped from the corner of his eye. Why are you crying? Taehyung asked softly. Jungkook laughed weakly. Because they stayed. SUGA finally spoke. Of course they stayed. Jungkook looked at him. SUGA's voice was calm, but his eyes were not. But you need to understand something. He paused. We would have stayed even if there were no fans, no stage, and no cameras. Jungkook said nothing. Those words reached somewhere deeper than any applause could. The medical team helped him sit up. He was still dizzy, but conscious. Jimin remained beside him, refusing to release his hand. Can you stand? A medic asked. Jungkook nodded automatically. Jimin immediately frowned. Don't nod just because you want to. Jungkook gave him a tired smile. You know me too well. Exactly. Jimin looked directly into his eyes. That's why I know you're lying. For the first time that night, Jungkook laughed. It was a tiny laugh, almost swallowed by the noise of the crowd, but every member heard it. The tension loosened slightly. RM approached the microphone. Tonight, something happened that frightened all of us, he told the audience. Jungkook needs to rest. The stadium responded with applause. Jungkook looked toward the crowd. His expression changed. He seemed overwhelmed by the kindness. I thought I had to keep going, he whispered. Jimin leaned closer. You don't. I thought if I stopped, I'd disappoint everyone. You won't. How do you know? Jimin stared at him. Because I know them. He gestured toward the audience. And because I know us. Jungkook lowered his head. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then he said something that made Jimin's expression change completely. There's a reason I didn't tell anyone. Jimin looked at him. A reason for what? Jungkook hesitated. The noise of the stadium seemed to disappear again. About the last few weeks. Jimin's heart sank. What happened during the last few weeks? Jungkook looked toward the dark tunnel leading backstage. His breathing became unsteady, not from the physical dizziness this time, but from something else. Fear. I've been getting messages. RM immediately turned toward him. What kind of messages? Jungkook shook his head. I didn't want anyone to worry. SUGA stood slowly. Jungkook. His voice was serious. What messages? Jungkook reached into the pocket of his stage jacket with trembling fingers. He pulled out a small folded piece of paper. Jimin stared at it. What is that? Jungkook looked down at the paper for several seconds before answering. It was left in my dressing room before the concert. Nobody moved. Jungkook unfolded it. His fingers trembled as he handed it to RM. RM read the first line, and all the color seemed to drain from his face. What does it say? Jin asked. RM didn't answer immediately. Namjoon. J-Hope asked. RM finally looked up. It says, tonight, you will finally understand what happens when you keep pretending you're okay. Silence fell over the group. Jimin's eyes widened. Who wrote that? Jungkook shook his head. I don't know. SUGA took one step toward the backstage tunnel. Where was it found? On my mirror. Was anyone there? No. RM folded the paper carefully. Security needs to know. Jungkook suddenly grabbed his wrist. Wait. RM looked at him. There's more. Jungkook's voice was barely audible. That wasn't the first one. Jimin stared. The backstage corridor felt strangely cold after the heat of the stage. And Jungkook could still hear the distant roar of the audience vibrating through the walls as Jimin walked beside him with one hand firmly gripping his arm. "Slow down," Jimin whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." Jungkook gave a faint smile, but his face remained pale. "I'm trying." The medical team guided him into a quiet room where the harsh stage lights were replaced by a single warm lamp. The smell of disinfectant filled the air. Jungkook sat on the edge of a couch while a medic checked his pulse and asked him several questions. "Any chest pain? No shortness of breath? A little dizziness?" Jungkook hesitated. "Still." Jimin immediately looked at him. "See?" Jungkook sighed. "I know. You always say you know." Jimin folded his arms. "And then you do the exact opposite." Jungkook lowered his eyes. There was something almost childlike in the way he sat there, his hands clasped between his knees, suddenly stripped of the confidence he carried on stage. The medic continued the examination while the other members waited outside. RM had ordered security to lock down the dressing room corridor. Nobody was allowed in or out until the source of the messages was identified. SUGA stood near the hallway entrance, staring at the security cameras displayed on a monitor. Jin paced slowly, repeatedly checking his phone. J-Hope kept asking whether Jungkook needed anything. Taeyong said almost nothing. He simply stood against the wall with his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the closed door. Finally, RM approached him. "You've been quiet." Taeyong looked up. "I'm thinking." "About the messages?" "About Jungkook." RM waited. Taeyong continued. He looked scared before he collapsed. RM nodded. "I saw it." "Not physically scared." Taeyong shook his head. "Something else." RM understood immediately. Jungkook had not looked like someone who was simply exhausted. He had looked like someone who had been expecting something terrible to happen. Inside the room, the medic finished checking him. "Your vital signs are improving, but you shouldn't return to the stage tonight." Jungkook stared at the floor. "The concert isn't finished." "That's not relevant right now." "But the fans will understand." Jimin leaned forward. "He's right." Jungkook looked at him. "You agree?" "Absolutely." "But, no buts." Jimin smiled faintly. "Tonight, your job is to sit here and breathe." Jungkook laughed softly. "You're becoming bossy." "Tonight?" Jimin raised an eyebrow. "I've always been bossy." The medic smiled and left the room. The moment the door closed, Jungkook's expression changed. He looked toward Jimin. "Can you ask everyone to come in?" Jimin nodded. A few seconds later, the other members entered. RM sat opposite Jungkook. SUGA remained standing. Jin pulled a chair closer. J-Hope sat beside Taeyong. For several moments, nobody spoke. Then RM placed the folded note on the table. "Tell us everything." Jungkook stared at the paper. "I started receiving them about 3 weeks ago." Jimin's face tightened. 3 weeks. Jungkook nodded. "The first one appeared after rehearsal." "What did it say?" SUGA asked. "It said you look tired." Jin frowned. "That's all." At first. Jungkook swallowed. Then the messages became more personal. RM leaned forward. "How personal?" Jungkook rubbed his thumb against his palm, a nervous habit Jimin recognized immediately. They mentioned things nobody should know. Such as my sleeping problems, things I said privately, conversations I had with staff. The room became silent. "Did you tell security?" RM asked. Jungkook shook his head. "I thought it was a joke." SUGA's voice was quiet. "And the second message?" Jungkook looked at him. It said, "You can't hide exhaustion forever." J-Hope's expression darkened. "And the third?" It said, "They love the version of you that never says no." Nobody moved. Jimin slowly sat beside Jungkook. "Why didn't you tell us?" Jungkook's eyes became wet. "Because I thought it would disappear." "And it didn't." "No, what did the fourth say?" Jungkook looked down. It said, "When the lights go out, you will finally be alone." Taeyong's jaw tightened. "That's not a prank." Jungkook nodded. "I know." RM picked up the final note. "And this one?" Jungkook stared at it. That one came today. Jimin looked at him. Before the concert? Yes. Where? On my mirror. Did you see anyone? No. SUGA stepped closer. What time? Jungkook thought for a moment. Around 6. Who was in the corridor? I don't remember. SUGA looked toward RM. We need the security footage from 6 to 7. RM nodded. Already requested. Jungkook suddenly looked uncomfortable. There's something else. Everyone turned toward him. What? Jungkook took a slow breath. Before the message appeared, I heard someone humming. Jimin's eyebrows lifted. Humming? Yes. What song? Jungkook closed his eyes as he tried to remember. One of ours. Which one? Spring Day. The room went silent. J-Hope stared at him. You're sure? Jungkook nodded. Very. SUGA's expression became unreadable. Could have been a staff member. Maybe, Jungkook said. But the voice sounded close. Male or female? RM asked. Jungkook hesitated. Male. Jimin leaned forward. Did you recognize it? No. Then why does it matter? Jungkook looked at him. Because he stopped humming when I opened the door. A chill seemed to pass through the room. RM immediately stood. Nobody leaves this area alone. Jean nodded. Agreed. And we're not telling the public about the notes yet, RM continued. We don't know what we're dealing with. Jungkook looked troubled. But the fans saw me collapse. They don't need to know everything tonight. Jimin looked at Jungkook. You need rest. Jungkook leaned back against the couch. For a few minutes, the room became quiet. Then Taeyoung's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen and froze. What? J-Hope asked. Taeyoung didn't answer. He walked toward RM and showed him the screen. It was a security notification. A restricted backstage camera had stopped recording for 11 minutes that evening. Which camera? SUGA asked. Taeyoung pointed to the number. SUGA's eyes narrowed. Camera 12. RM stared at him. That's the corridor outside Jungkook's dressing room. Jimin stood immediately. What? SUGA nodded. Someone knew exactly which camera to disable. Jungkook's face went pale again. So they were there. Nobody answered. Suddenly the room's door opened. A security officer entered carrying a tablet. We found something. RM stepped toward him. What? The officer turned the screen around. At 6:14 p.m., someone entered the corridor. Can you identify them? Not completely. Why? They were wearing a staff jacket and a cap. Jimin moved closer. Face. Covered. Can you tell who it was? The officer hesitated. We noticed something unusual. RM's expression hardened. What? The person didn't use an access card. SUGA immediately looked at Jungkook. How did they get through the door? The security officer answered quietly. Someone opened it for them from inside. Jungkook's eyes widened. From inside? Yes. Jimin looked around the room. Who was inside at 6:14? The officer checked the tablet. According to the logs, only one person was registered in that room. Jungkook's stomach dropped. Me. The room fell silent. Jungkook shook his head. That's impossible. SUGA stepped closer. Were you in your dressing room at 6:14? Jungkook thought carefully. I was changing. Alone? Yes. Did you open the door? Jungkook shook his head. No, the officer looked uncomfortable. There's another problem. RM's voice became low. What? The door log says it was opened from the inside. Jimin stared at Jungkook. But you didn't open it. Jungkook slowly shook his head again. No, SUGA looked toward the security officer. Then someone was inside before Jungkook entered. The officer nodded. That's what it appears to show. Jungkook suddenly stood, but his legs weakened. Jimin caught him. Easy. Jungkook grabbed Jimin's shoulder. Someone was hiding in my room? We don't know that yet, RM said. But we're going to find out. Jungkook's breathing became faster. Jimin immediately placed a hand on his back. Look at me. Jungkook did. You're safe. What if I'm not? Jungkook whispered. Jimin's expression softened. Then none of us leave. Jimin, get away from the door! RM shouted as the backstage lights suddenly flickered, plunging the corridor into darkness for 3 terrifying seconds. Jimin instinctively pulled Jungkook closer, while SUGA stepped forward and blocked the entrance with his body. Emergency lights finally came on, bathing the hallway in a dim red glow. Nobody moved. The monitor that had displayed the mysterious message was now completely black, its power cable disconnected. Jungkook's breathing was fast. He knows, he whispered. Who? Jimin asked. Jungkook stared at the dark screen. Whoever sent those messages. RM looked toward security, locked down the entire backstage area. Several guards immediately moved down the corridor, checking every entrance and exit. Jin remained beside Jungkook. You're staying here? Jungkook nodded, but his hands were trembling. Taeyong noticed and quietly placed a bottle of water into them. Drink. Jungkook took it. His fingers were cold. Thanks. Taeyong watched him carefully. You don't have to pretend with us anymore. Jungkook lowered his eyes. I'm trying. Jimin stayed close enough that their shoulders touched. That's all we need. The security officer returned with a worried expression. We checked the corridor. RM turned toward him. And nobody is there. SUGA frowned. What about the cameras? Still being checked. Check the service elevators too. The officer nodded and left. For several minutes, nobody spoke. The tension felt physical, like pressure against the walls. Then Jungkook quietly said, I remember something. Everyone looked at him. What? The night the first message appeared. Jimin leaned closer. What about it? Jungkook rubbed his palms together. I wasn't alone. RM's expression changed. You told us you were. I know. Who was there? Jungkook hesitated. Someone came into my room after rehearsal. SUGA's eyes narrowed. Who? Jungkook looked toward the floor. A staff member. Name? Jungkook shook his head. I didn't know his name. What did he want? He said he was checking equipment. J-Hope frowned. At that hour? Jungkook nodded. He asked me whether I was tired. Jimin immediately stiffened. That's what the first message said. Jungkook nodded slowly. Exactly. RM stepped closer. What did he look like? Jungkook closed his eyes, searching his memory. Black cap. Gray staff jacket. Tall. Maybe around 30. Anything distinctive? SUGA asked. Jungkook hesitated. He had a small scar near his left eyebrow. SUGA looked at RM. That should be enough for security. RM immediately sent the description. Then Jungkook's expression changed. Wait. What? Jimin asked. He wasn't wearing a staff badge. The room went silent. You noticed that? Not at the time. Jungkook swallowed. I remember because he joked about forgetting it. SUGA's eyes hardened. And you let him stay? I didn't think anything of it. Nobody blames you, RM said quickly. We need to understand how he got access. Suddenly the security officer returned. We found someone matching the description. Everyone turned. Where? Near the loading entrance. RM moved immediately. Take us there. No, the officer said. You stay here. SUGA shook his head. We're not leaving Jungkook. Jungkook stood. I'll go. Jimin grabbed his arm. Absolutely not. But if he knows something. You're not chasing someone after almost collapsing on stage. Jungkook looked frustrated. Jimin. No, the firmness in Jimin's voice stopped him. You nearly fell tonight. You're not walking into a potentially dangerous situation. Jungkook looked at him for a moment, then slowly nodded. Okay. RM left with security while the others stayed. The waiting was agonizing. Jin tried to lighten the mood. Anyone want snacks? Nobody answered. Jin sighed. Worth a try. Taeyong gave a tiny smile. You're terrible at comforting people. I know. Jin shrugged. But I'm consistent. For a brief moment, Jungkook smiled. Then his phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. His smile vanished. What? Jimin asked. Jungkook slowly turned the phone around. There was a new message. No number. No sender. Just a photograph. It showed RM walking toward the loading entrance. Beneath the image were 6 words. He shouldn't have gone looking. Jimin's stomach dropped. How did they take that photo? SUGA immediately reached for the phone. Show me. The message disappeared before he could touch it. What? Jimin whispered. It's gone. Jungkook stared at the screen. They deleted it remotely. SUGA looked toward the ceiling. This isn't random. J-Hope's face became tense. Someone is watching us in real time. Suddenly RM's voice came through the security radio. Everyone stay inside. We have a problem. Jimin grabbed the radio. What happened? Static answered. Then RM's voice returned quieter. The person we found isn't the person we're looking for. SUGA frowned. Explain. He works here. His ID is legitimate. Jimin looked at Jungkook. Then who was in the corridor? RM didn't answer immediately. I found something. What? The loading entrance has another access route. Where does it lead? To the old production hallway. SUGA's expression changed. The abandoned hallway? Yes. J-Hope looked confused. Why would anyone use that? RM answered. Because there are no active cameras there. Jungkook's face went pale. That's where my first message appeared. Everyone looked at him. You went there? Jimin asked. Once, Jungkook said. A few days ago. Why? I heard someone playing piano. Jin stared at him. Piano. Jungkook nodded. Very late at night. What did they play? Jungkook swallowed. The melody of one of our old songs. SUGA looked at him sharply. Which one? Jungkook answered. The song we never released. Nobody spoke. J-Hope stared at him. That demo. Jungkook nodded. The one only the members and a few producers know about? Yes. Jimin looked increasingly disturbed. Then whoever is doing this has access to private material. RM's voice came through the radio again. I'm coming back. A few minutes later, the door opened. RM entered holding a small black object. I found this near the old hallway. He placed it on the table. It was a tiny recording device. Jimin stared at it. Was it active? Yes. SUGA picked it up carefully. How long? Battery says 3 days. Jungkook's face tightened. 3 days. RM nodded. Someone has been recording us. Jimin looked at Jungkook. Maybe that's how they knew. Jungkook's voice was barely audible. They've been listening. SUGA examined the device. There's something else. He turned it over. A small symbol had been scratched into the casing. RM recognized it immediately. That's the old production team's mark. Jin frowned. The team that worked with us years ago? RM nodded. Most of them don't work with us anymore. J-Hope looked at Jungkook. Could someone from that team have access? RM shook his head. Not officially. Jungkook sat down. Then why me? Nobody answered. The question hung in the room. Why Jungkook? Why the messages? Why the threats? Why had someone waited until the concert to make their presence known? Jimin sat beside him. Maybe it's not about you. Jungkook looked at him. What do you mean? Maybe it's about something you know. Jungkook's expression changed. I don't know anything. SUGA looked at him carefully. Are you sure? Jungkook looked toward him. Yes. But the hesitation lasted just a fraction too long. Jimin noticed. Jungkook. What? There's something you're not telling us. Jungkook sighed. I didn't remember until tonight. Remember what? Jungkook stared at his hands. About 6 months ago, someone approached me after rehearsal. RM leaned forward. Who? I don't know. What did they say? Jungkook swallowed. They told me there was something wrong with one of the production files. SUGA's expression became serious. What kind of problem? They said someone had been changing things without authorization. Did you see the file? No, why didn't you tell us? Jungkook looked ashamed. Because the person told me it was being handled. Jimin stared at him. And you believed them? I wanted to. The answer was painfully honest. Jungkook looked exhausted. I didn't want another problem. RM softened. What happened next? Nothing. Until now. Jungkook nodded. Until now. Suddenly the building's alarm sounded. A sharp electronic tone echoed through the backstage area. Everyone stood. Security rushed into the room. What happened? RM demanded. Someone triggered an emergency door. Where? Stage left. Jimin immediately looked at Jungkook. Stay here. But Jungkook stood anyway. I'm coming. No, Jimin, if someone is inside, then security will handle it. Jungkook stopped. His expression revealed frustration, fear, and something deeper. He was tired of being treated like someone fragile. Jimin saw it. This isn't because you're weak, he said quietly. It's because you matter. Jungkook's eyes softened. He nodded. Okay. Security disappeared down the corridor. A minute later, the alarm stopped. Everyone waited. Then a guard returned carrying a small envelope. We found this behind the stage. RM took it. For whom? The guard looked at Jungkook. For him. Jimin's face tightened. Don't open it. Jungkook stared at the envelope. His name was written across the front in handwriting he recognized. Not from the previous messages. From somewhere much older. I know this handwriting, he whispered. SUGA looked at him. Whose is it? Jungkook slowly turned the envelope over. There was a faded symbol stamped on the back. Jungkook's eyes widened. This belonged to someone who worked with us before. Who? Jimin asked. Jungkook's voice trembled. Someone who disappeared. The room fell silent. Jungkook slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a single photograph. It showed the 7 members during an old rehearsal, laughing together. But someone had been circled in the background. A person none of them recognized. On the back of the photograph was one sentence. Ask Jungkook why he was the only one who saw me. Jungkook stared at the photograph, his breathing becoming heavier. Jimin looked over his shoulder. Who is that? Jungkook didn't answer. His eyes remained fixed on the unfamiliar face. Then after several seconds he whispered, I remember him. Jimin's voice became gentle. Who was he? Jungkook looked at all 6 members. The man who told me 6 months ago that someone was changing the production files. And suddenly, everyone understood that the mysterious messages were not about a random threat at all. They were connected to a secret Jungkook had unknowingly carried for months. His name was Miho, Jungkook whispered, staring at the photograph as if the face printed on it had suddenly stepped out of the past and into the room. Nobody spoke. The name seemed to change the temperature of the entire backstage area. Jimin sat beside Jungkook, watching his expression carefully. Who is Miho? He asked. Jungkook swallowed. He used to work with the production team. RM took the photograph from his hand and examined it. I don't remember him. Neither do I, Jean said. He wasn't around for very long. SUGA stared at the photograph. That's strange. Jungkook looked at him. Why? Because I remember seeing him. Everyone turned toward SUGA. You do? RM asked. SUGA nodded slowly. Not personally. But I remember his name appearing on an internal production document. Jungkook's eyes widened. When? Years ago. SUGA looked at the photograph again. He was involved with some of the early stage systems. J-Hope frowned. Then why would he disappear? SUGA didn't answer immediately. I don't know. Jungkook rubbed his hands together. The nervous movement had become almost constant. He came to me 6 months ago, he said. He told me someone had been altering production files. Which files? RM asked. Stage layouts. Lighting cues. Audio timing. Things like that. J-Hope's expression changed. Could that have caused tonight's problem? Jungkook looked up. I don't know. Think, SUGA said gently. Did anything feel wrong during rehearsals? Jungkook closed his eyes. The memory came slowly. A lighting cue appearing several seconds late. An audio track starting at the wrong moment. A stage mark that had been moved. None of it had seemed important individually. Together they suddenly looked different. There were mistakes, Jungkook whispered. A lot of them. RM leaned closer. Why didn't anyone notice? We thought they were technical errors. Jungkook's voice became quieter. Miho said they weren't. Jimin stared at him. What exactly did he tell you? Jungkook looked toward the floor. He said someone was testing the limits of the system. Testing what? How much they could change without being noticed. The room went silent again. Did he say why? RM asked. Jungkook shook his head. No. Did he give you evidence? He showed me something on his phone. What? Jungkook hesitated. A file. SUGA immediately asked. What kind? A recording. Of what? Jungkook's expression tightened. A rehearsal. J-Hope leaned forward. Our rehearsal? Yes. Which one? Jungkook closed his eyes. The rehearsal from the night I injured my ankle. Everyone exchanged glances. Jin's expression became serious. That was months ago. Jungkook nodded. Miho said the recording showed something that wasn't supposed to happen. What? Jungkook stared at the photograph. Someone had changed my stage position. Jimin's eyes widened. Changed it how? The mark on the floor was moved. SUGA's voice became quiet. How far? About half a meter. RM's expression hardened. Enough to change where you would land. Jungkook nodded. That's what Miho said. Jimin suddenly stood. And you never told us? Jungkook looked at him. I didn't know if it was intentional. But you knew something was wrong. I knew something might be wrong. Jimin's eyes filled with frustration. Jungkook. Jungkook lowered his head. I'm sorry. Jimin closed his eyes and took a breath. When he opened them again, his anger had softened into fear. I'm not angry because you kept a secret. He paused. I'm angry because you carried the fear alone. Jungkook looked away. RM placed a hand on Jimin's shoulder. We need facts. He turned to Jungkook. What happened to Miho after he showed you the recording? Jungkook swallowed. He disappeared. Immediately. 2 days later. Did he contact you? Once. What did he say? Jungkook's fingers tightened around his sleeve. He told me not to trust anyone who said the problem was already solved. SUGA's eyes narrowed. And then? Nothing. Until the messages began. Jungkook nodded. Yes. Suddenly the room's atmosphere shifted. A faint sound came from the hallway. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Everyone turned toward the door. The footsteps stopped. J-Hope stood. Jin moved closer to Jungkook. SUGA silently gestured for everyone to remain still. Another sound followed. 3 soft knocks. Nobody answered. Then a voice came from the other side. Jungkook. Jungkook froze. Jimin grabbed his hand. The voice sounded familiar. Too familiar. Jungkook stared at the door. That's him. RM whispered. Miho? Jungkook nodded. That's his voice. Security immediately moved toward the entrance. RM raised a hand. Wait. The voice came again. Jungkook, I know you're in there. Jimin looked toward RM. How could he be here? Nobody knew. Security opened the door. The hallway was empty. No one was there. J-Hope stepped outside. Check both directions. Guards ran down the corridor. Jungkook remained frozen. He was here. SUGA looked at him. Or someone has a recording of his voice. Jungkook shook his head. No. How can you be sure? Because he called me by a name nobody else uses. Jimin looked at him. What name? Jungkook's face became pale. Cookie. Jimin stared at him. Only people who knew me before all this called me that. RM looked toward the hallway. Then someone knows your history. Jungkook's phone vibrated. He looked down. A new message had appeared. Stop looking for Miho. Jungkook's hands began to shake. Jimin took the phone. Another message appeared immediately. He isn't missing. Then another. He's hiding. Jimin looked at Jungkook. What does that mean? Jungkook shook his head. I don't know. SUGA took the phone. Maybe we should stop reacting to these messages. Why? J-Hope asked. Because whoever sends them wants us to chase shadows. SUGA looked at RM. We need to understand the system, not the messages. RM nodded. Then let's find the original production files. They're archived, J-Hope said. Somewhere in the old production server. SUGA looked toward him. Can you access it? Maybe. Do it. Jimin frowned. What if that's what they want? SUGA looked at him. Then we'll know. Jungkook listened quietly. He was exhausted, but something inside him had changed. For the first time since the messages began, he wasn't simply afraid. He wanted answers. He wanted to understand why someone had been watching him, and why tonight's collapse seemed connected to events from months earlier. I'll help, he said. Jimin immediately objected. No, Jimin. You need to rest. I know. Then rest. Jungkook smiled faintly. You sound like my doctor. Maybe your doctor is right. Jungkook looked at RM. Hyung. RM considered him for several seconds. You can help from here. Jimin smiled slightly. Thank you. Jungkook rolled his eyes. You two are impossible. Jin finally laughed. Good. He's complaining again. That's a good sign. The room relaxed slightly. J-Hope opened his laptop and began searching through archive production data. SUGA stood behind him. RM contacted the technical team. Taeyong sat beside Jungkook, quietly watching the screen. Minutes passed. Then J-Hope suddenly stopped typing. I found something. Everyone gathered around. What? J-Hope opened a folder labeled with the date of the rehearsal, where Jungkook had injured his ankle. Inside were dozens of files. One had been modified recently. This shouldn't be here. SUGA leaned closer. Open it. The file contained a video recording. J-Hope pressed play. The footage showed the stage during rehearsal. The members moved through the choreography. Jungkook approached his position. Then the camera angle shifted. For a fraction of a second, a person appeared behind the stage structure. Pause. SUGA pointed. J-Hope froze the frame. The figure was wearing a production jacket. RM leaned toward the screen. Can you enhance it? J-Hope tried. The image became clearer. The person turned slightly. Jungkook stared at the face. That's him. Jimin looked at him. Miho. Jungkook nodded. Yes. SUGA frowned. Look at his hand. Everyone stared. Miho was holding something. A small device. J-Hope zoomed in. That's a remote trigger. RM's expression changed. For what? Nobody answered. The video continued. Miho looked toward Jungkook's position. Turn it off. Jimin shouted, but the laptop had already gone dark, leaving only the faint reflection of 7 stunned faces on its black screen. Jungkook remained motionless, staring at his own reflection as if he were trying to understand whether the fear in his eyes belonged to the present or to a memory he had buried months ago. RM closed the laptop and looked at everyone. Nobody says anything outside this room until we understand what happened. SUGA nodded. Agreed. Jimin crouched beside Jungkook. You okay? Jungkook didn't answer immediately. His fingers had begun trembling again. Jimin noticed and gently covered them with his own. Breathe. Jungkook inhaled slowly. I know that voice. You said that. But I don't understand why. Then we'll figure it out. Jungkook looked at him. What if I don't want to know? Jimin's expression softened. Then we stop. Jungkook shook his head. No, he looked toward the laptop. I need to know. RM nodded. Then we do this together. The technical team was brought into the room, but the moment they examined the computer, something unexpected happened. The recording file had disappeared. Not corrupted. Not damaged. Completely erased. J-Hope stared at the screen. That's impossible. Can you recover it? RM asked. Maybe. J-Hope began working while SUGA watched the system logs. Someone accessed the archive remotely. From where? I can't tell yet. Can you trace the connection? I'm trying. Jungkook sat quietly on the couch. The room around him felt distant. He could hear keyboards clicking, whispered conversations, and the occasional crackle of the security radio, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He remembered Miho standing behind the stage structure. He remembered the remote device in his hand. He remembered the voice from the recording. And then another memory surfaced. 6 months earlier, after rehearsal, Jungkook had walked alone through a nearly empty corridor. He had been exhausted. He remembered hearing someone call his name, Jungkook. He had turned around. A familiar staff member had been standing several meters away. The memory had always seemed ordinary. Now it felt wrong. He remembered the person's expression. Calm. Almost too calm. He remembered being asked whether he was sleeping well. He remembered answering yes even though it wasn't true. He remembered the person smiling. And he remembered one strange sentence. Sometimes people only notice you when something goes wrong. Jungkook opened his eyes. Jimin was watching him. What? Jimin asked. I remember another conversation. With him? I don't know. Tell me. Jungkook hesitated. Someone told me people only notice me when something goes wrong. Jimin's face tightened. That sounds like the messages. Jungkook nodded. Exactly. SUGA overheard them. When did they say it? 6 months ago. SUGA looked at RM. Before Miho approached him? Jungkook nodded. Yes. Then the messages didn't begin 3 weeks ago, SUGA said. They began much earlier. The realization unsettled everyone. For months, someone had apparently been paying attention to Jungkook's behavior, his exhaustion, his private routines, and his movements backstage. The notes were only the visible part of something much larger. J-Hope suddenly raised his head. I found a backup. Everyone turned. What? The deleted video. He looked nervous. But there's a problem. What problem? The backup is incomplete. How incomplete? Only 30 seconds survived. Play it. The video appeared. It showed the same rehearsal. Miho was standing behind the stage. He raised the remote. Then another person entered the frame. The camera didn't show the face, only the person's shoulder and hand. The voice began. You were supposed to wait. Miho answered. He was already in position. That wasn't your decision. You said to test the system. Not like this. Miho looked toward Jungkook. He almost got hurt. The second person became angry. That's not the point. Then what is? The point is whether he'll remember. The recording ended. Nobody spoke. Jungkook stared at the screen. Whether I'll remember what? Jimin looked at him. Do you? Jungkook shook his head. No. SUGA's expression darkened. Maybe that's the real secret. RM turned toward him. Explain. Someone may have wanted Jungkook to forget something. Something from that rehearsal? Possibly. Jungkook's heart began beating faster. I don't remember much from that night. Jimin looked at him. What do you remember? The pain. Jungkook closed his eyes. Then waking up. He paused. And someone sitting beside me. Who? I don't know. Try. Jungkook pressed his fingertips against his temple. A man. Miho. No, then who? Jungkook opened his eyes. I can't see his face. Jimin's voice softened. Don't force it. Jungkook nodded. But I remember his voice. Everyone looked at him. What did he say? Jungkook whispered. He told me not to tell anyone what I had seen. RM's expression changed. What had you seen? Jungkook shook his head. I don't know. SUGA stared at the recovered footage. Maybe your memory isn't gone. Maybe you're blocking it because it frightened you. Jungkook looked down. Maybe. Then the security door opened. A senior security officer entered. We found something in the old production hallway. RM stood. What? The officer placed a small box on the table. This was hidden behind a panel. J-Hope opened it carefully. Inside were several old access cards, a USB drive, and a photograph. Jungkook picked up the photograph. His hands froze. It showed the 7 members standing backstage several years earlier. Behind them was the same unfamiliar man from the photograph they had received. But this time, someone had written a name beneath him. Miho Park. Jungkook stared at it. That's his full name. SUGA took the USB drive. Let's see what's inside. J-Hope connected it to an isolated computer. The drive contained hundreds of files. Production schedules. Stage layouts. Audio recordings. Internal communications. Then one folder caught SUGA's attention. Open that. J-Hope clicked it. The folder was labeled with a single word, Jungkook. Jimin's face tightened. Why is there a folder with his name? Nobody answered. Inside were documents dated across several years. Performance notes, health observations, schedule patterns, personal preferences, even handwritten comments. Jungkook stared at the screen in disbelief. Who made this? RM scrolled through the files. We don't know. Jimin's voice became angry. This is private information. SUGA opened another document. It contained a detailed timeline of Jungkook's movements during rehearsals. This isn't normal production documentation. J-Hope shook his head. No, then they found a file dated 6 months earlier. Its title was Incident. RM opened it. The document described the rehearsal where Jungkook's stage position had been altered. But there was one sentence that made everyone freeze. Subject witnessed unauthorized access to the control system. Jungkook stared at the words. Subject. Jimin looked at him. They're talking about you. Jungkook nodded slowly. I remember now. Everyone turned toward him. What? Jungkook's breathing became uneven. I saw someone at the control panel. Who? I don't know. What were they doing? Jungkook closed his eyes, changing the lighting sequence. SUGA leaned forward. And then they turned around. Did you see their face? Jungkook hesitated. Yes. Jimin held his hand. Who was it? Jungkook's eyes opened. His expression was filled with confusion. I thought it was Miho. SUGA shook his head. The footage suggests Miho was behind the stage. Jungkook stared at him. Then the person at the control panel wasn't Miho. The room became silent. Who was it? RM asked. Jungkook looked toward the laptop. I don't know. Then he remembered something else. A voice. A sentence. You didn't see anything. Jungkook's breathing stopped. I know that voice. Jimin looked at him. Whose? Jungkook stared at the door. The same voice from the recording. RM asked. Can you identify it now? Jungkook slowly nodded. I think so. Who? Jungkook hesitated for several seconds. Then he whispered the name. Jimin's face changed immediately. RM went completely still. Jin's mouth fell slightly open. Taeyong stared at Jungkook as if he had misheard him. The name belonged to someone none of them expected. Someone who had been close enough to them to know their schedules, their routines, and their private conversations. Someone who had been present during countless rehearsals. Someone who could move through restricted areas without attracting suspicion. Are you sure? RM asked. Jungkook nodded, tears forming in his eyes. Yes. Jimin squeezed his hand. Tell us. Jungkook took a trembling breath. It was the voice of someone we trusted. Before anyone could ask another question, the room's door opened. A staff member stood there, looking unusually calm. He smiled at the group. Is everything okay? Jungkook looked up. His face went pale. He knew that voice. And suddenly, the fear that had followed him for months had a face. The room became so quiet that Jungkook could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner above them. And for several seconds nobody moved as the staff member stood in the doorway with the same calm expression Jungkook remembered from 6 months earlier. Is everything okay? The man asked again, and Jungkook felt the blood drain from his face because that voice was unmistakable. The same voice that had whispered, "You didn't see anything," after the rehearsal accident, the same voice that had appeared in the recovered recording, and the same voice that had once told him that people only noticed him when something went wrong. Jimin immediately noticed Jungkook's reaction and stepped closer, placing himself slightly between Jungkook and the doorway. Please stay there, Jimin said. The staff member stopped. Of course, he answered, still calm. RM watched him carefully. What's your name? The man seemed surprised by the question. You know me, Namjoon. I want you to say it, RM replied. The man's smile disappeared. Daniel. Jungkook closed his eyes for a moment. The name struck him with painful familiarity. Daniel had been around them for years, rarely appearing in front of cameras, always working quietly behind the scenes, coordinating technical movements, checking equipment, helping with rehearsals, and solving problems before most people even noticed them. He had earned their trust precisely because he had never seemed threatening. He was the person who remembered spare microphones, the person who knew which hallway was less crowded, the person who could tell when a stage cable was loose, and the person who sometimes brought Jungkook water without being asked. Now every one of those memories felt different. SUGA broke the silence. Why are you here? Daniel glanced toward the medical equipment and then toward Jungkook. I heard there was an incident. Who told you? RM asked. Security. SUGA's eyes narrowed. Security didn't announce anything publicly. Daniel paused. I was informed. By whom? Daniel didn't answer. Jimin's hand tightened around Jungkook's. Jungkook could feel his own heartbeat pounding against his ribs. Daniel looked directly at him. You should be resting. Jungkook's voice came out quietly. You said that before. Daniel's expression changed for the first time. What do you mean? 6 months ago. Daniel remained silent. Jungkook continued. You told me to rest after the rehearsal. I was concerned about you. You told me I hadn't seen anything. Daniel's eyes hardened. I don't remember saying that. Ido. The words came from Jungkook with surprising strength. Jimin looked at him, realizing that the frightened expression from earlier had begun to disappear. Jungkook was still pale, still weak, but something inside him had shifted. He was no longer running from the memory. He was confronting it. RM stepped forward. Daniel, we found a recording. Daniel's eyes briefly flicked toward the laptop. It was a tiny movement, but SUGA noticed. What recording? Daniel asked. The rehearsal from 6 months ago. Daniel said nothing. We also found an archive containing detailed information about Jungkook, RM continued. Daniel's jaw tightened. I don't know anything about that. Then why did you look at the laptop? SUGA asked. Daniel looked at him. I didn't. You did. SUGA's voice remained calm. You looked at it before Namjoon mentioned the recording. Daniel's expression changed again. J-Hope slowly stood. Jin moved closer to Jungkook. Taeyong remained silent, watching Daniel with a level of concentration that made the room feel smaller. You think I did something to him? Daniel asked. RM answered carefully. We're trying to understand what happened. After all these years you suspect me? Daniel's voice carried hurt, but Jungkook could hear something beneath it. Defensiveness. Daniel took one step into the room. Jimin immediately raised his hand. Don't come closer. Daniel stopped. Jimin, I've worked with you for years. I know. Then you know I would never hurt Jungkook. Jimin looked at him for several seconds. I want to believe that. Daniel lowered his eyes. You should. Jungkook suddenly spoke. Then tell me why you were in the control room that night. Daniel looked at him. I wasn't. You were. No, I saw you. Daniel's face went completely still. Jungkook's breathing quickened, but he continued. You were standing beside the console. Daniel shook his head. You were disoriented after the accident. Before the accident. Silence. Jungkook stared at him. I saw you before anything happened. Daniel looked away. You were exhausted. Maybe, Jungkook said. But I wasn't blind. The words struck the room with unexpected force. Daniel finally sighed. Fine. Everyone waited. I was there. Jimin's eyes narrowed. Why did you lie? Daniel rubbed his forehead. Because I was told to. By whom? RM asked. Daniel hesitated. I can't tell you. SUGA's expression hardened. Then we're done protecting you. Daniel looked at him. I'm not asking you to protect me. Then protect Jungkook by telling us the truth. Daniel looked at Jungkook again. You don't understand what happened. Jungkook answered quietly. Then explain it. Daniel walked slowly toward the table but stopped several feet away. The production system had been compromised. RM nodded. We know. No, you don't. Daniel shook his head. You think someone was changing stage cues to hurt Jungkook. That's only part of it. SUGA crossed his arms. Continue. Daniel took a breath. Someone had gained access to internal production files months before the rehearsal. Who? I don't know. But you knew about it, RM said. Yes. And Miho. Daniel's expression changed at the name. Miho discovered the breach. Then why did he disappear? Daniel looked toward the floor. Because he tried to expose it. J-Hope frowned. Expose it to whom? Management. And Daniel's voice became quieter. He was told to stop. Jungkook felt a chill run through him. By who? Daniel didn't answer. Daniel, RM said firmly. By who? Daniel finally looked up. Someone with authority over the production operation. Name. Daniel hesitated. I can't. SUGA stepped closer. Why? Because when Miho refused to stop, someone threatened him. Threatened him how? They told him that if he continued, they would make it look like he had sabotaged the tour. Jungkook's eyes widened. So he ran? Daniel nodded. He disappeared because he was afraid. Then why did he contact me? Jungkook asked. Daniel looked at him. Because he believed you were the only member who had seen the person at the console. Jungkook's chest tightened. The memory came back more clearly now. The dim rehearsal lights, the quiet control room, the glow of the monitor, a hand moving across the console, and the sudden realization that someone was changing the sequence. He remembered turning around, he remembered seeing a face, he remembered being told not to speak, but the memory was still incomplete. Why didn't he tell the others? Jimin asked, Daniel answered. Because he didn't know who he could trust. Jimin's expression became hurt. You mean he didn't trust us? He didn't know whether the breach had reached inside the organization. RM looked at Daniel. And you? I was trying to investigate quietly. SUGA laughed bitterly. Quietly? He pointed toward the laptop. You created a surveillance file on Jungkook. Daniel immediately shook his head. I didn't create that file. Then who did? I don't know. But you knew about it. Daniel was silent. That silence was enough. Jimin looked at him with disbelief. You knew someone was monitoring him. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes. Jungkook stared at him. Why didn't you stop them? Daniel's eyes became wet. Because I was trying to find out who they were. You could have told me. And put you in more danger? Jungkook's voice broke. I was already in danger. Daniel lowered his head. I know. Jimin stepped closer. Do you understand what happened tonight? Daniel looked at him. Yes. Someone sent Jungkook threatening messages. Daniel nodded. I know. Someone entered his dressing room. I know. Someone had access to the backstage network. I know. Jimin's voice rose. And you knew all of this? Daniel finally answered. I knew someone was watching him. Since when? Since the first message. Jungkook's eyes widened. You knew. Daniel nodded. Yes. The room erupted in overlapping voices. RM demanded answers. J-Hope questioned the security protocols. Jin asked why Daniel had allowed the situation to continue, while Taeyong stood beside Jungkook and watched Daniel with an expression that was almost painfully disappointed. Through all of it, Jimin remained focused on Jungkook. Don't listen to them, he whispered. Just breathe. Jungkook looked at him. I want the truth. We'll get it. Jungkook nodded. Daniel waited until the room became quiet again. I didn't send the messages, he said. I didn't enter your dressing room, and I didn't cause tonight's collapse. SUGA looked at him. Then prove it. Daniel reached into his jacket slowly and removed a small phone. He placed it on the table. This contains everything I've collected. RM stared at the device. Why bring it now? Daniel looked directly at Jungkook. Because tonight changed everything. Jungkook frowned. What do you mean? Before tonight, I thought the person watching you wanted information. Daniel paused. Now I believe they wanted you frightened enough to remember something. Jungkook felt a cold wave pass through him. Remember what? Daniel looked at him for a long moment. The night you saw the person at the console. Jungkook closed his eyes. Suddenly another fragment appeared in his mind. The console lights, the smell of dust and warm electronics, his own footsteps approaching, and a voice behind him saying, You're not supposed to be here. He remembered turning around. He remembered a face, and this time, the memory was clear enough to hurt. Jungkook opened his eyes and looked at Daniel. I remember. Everyone became silent. Who? Jimin asked softly. Jungkook's eyes filled with tears. It wasn't Daniel. He looked toward RM, then SUGA, Jin, J-Hope and Taeyong. It wasn't Miho either. Daniel waited. Jungkook swallowed hard. It was someone who had access to the production system. Who? RM asked. Jungkook slowly said the name. The room fell silent, but this time the silence did not come from fear. It came from realization. The person Jungkook remembered was not an outsider, not a stranger, and not someone who had disappeared. It was someone who had been quietly working to protect the group from the beginning, someone whose actions had looked suspicious only because they had been hiding the investigation. And suddenly the messages, the missing footage, Miho's disappearance, the altered stage cues, and Jungkook's collapse began to form a single painful story. Daniel had not been the person behind the danger. He had been chasing it from the shadows. And when the members finally understood why he had remained silent, Jimin reached for Jungkook's hand and whispered, "You were never alone, even when you thought you were." Jungkook squeezed his hand, tears finally falling freely, and for the first time since the terrifying moment on stage, the weight inside his chest began to lift. The truth was still painful, but it was no longer something he had to carry by himself.